Hello, Travis Dotson here from the Wildfire Lessons Learned Center over in the United States. I'm going to be talking to you today about our journey and maybe some lessons about building a Lessons Learned Center. All right, I'll start with calling attention to this piece of our tagline. A lesson is learned when we change our behavior. And the reason we have that as a tagline, it's been challenged by people that have very valid points about, there's other ways to learn lessons that don't include changes in behavior. Fair enough. But we choose to keep it there and kind of remind ourselves about the challenge in our business of moving from lessons available to lessons learned, right? But how is it that you get what we like to highlight as the change in behavior? How is it that people are going to start doing things different? And that's really a dilemma we come back to often, and we've got maybe some best practices about that. All right, our history, we're born of tragedy, like a lot of things in our business. The 1994 fire season in the United States resulted in 34 firefighter fatalities, 14 of them on the South Canyon fire, which is pictured here. It's an event that really caused us to do some introspection, ask some tough questions about ourselves and our culture and our practices, and spurred a lot of action. One of the things that came out of that was this study carried out by the Tridata Corporation. Pretty massive study, and had a lot of findings and recommendations. One of those recommendations was establishing a center for lessons learned. That was pretty much modeled after the Center for Army Lessons Learned. And so in 1998, those recommendations came out, and in 2002, the Wildland Fire Lessons Learned Center was established. So if you're in that process, understand that it takes time. 98, the recommendation was made. 2002, we were stood up. All right, let's talk about the perspective at the time. At the time, just like now, we accept that unintended events occur out there in the field, and from those unintended outcomes come reports. And this is true in 1994 and previous to that, which is when things we don't like happen, or even sometimes when things we do like, but more often than not, it's accidents. We write a report, and in the report, we chronicle what happened, and then some lessons, maybe some pointers on how, maybe how to prevent it, maybe just some other things, some other lessons or insights that came out of the event. So at the time, the perspective was largely that, hey, these reports have all the lessons in them, but the problem is that those reports aren't getting to the practitioners who can implement the lessons. And so it's really an access problem. If we can just get the practitioners access to the reports wherein lie the lessons, they can then, consume those lessons and implement them, and we can consider the learning loop closed. Obviously, this is a big generalization, but there was a lot of focus on accessibility to the report. So early on, when the Lessons Learned Center was established, we created the Incident Review Database. Massive effort to collect all these reports and put them on the internet in a library of some sort and make them accessible. And to this day, you can go to the Incident Review Database and put in some pretty basic search terms and pull up hundreds of reports that have been written over the years about fire-related incidents and accidents. And in those reports are all types of lessons. That is what we started to realize, is that our plan involved a lot of hope, right? We hope that the practitioner goes to the internet and finds the incident review database and pulls the information out and reads the report and turns around and goes out there and implements the lesson. The access is a crucial part of what we now see as a bigger process, but stopping at just making reports accessible is something we realized is not the best in terms of moving towards that change in behavior. So our current process, or perspective, I guess I should say, the events still take place out there, right? We still write reports about them. Well, we as the Lessons Learned Center don't write the reports. I guess I should clarify that. Same as always here is individual entities like fire departments or the agencies, the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management. They write these reports, they send them to us. We collect them, we put them on the internet, we make them accessible, but in doing so, we analyze them, we look at them collectively, we identify certain events that occur over and over again, and lessons that are similar, lessons that are unique, and we take out of that analysis, we do a lot of discussion amongst our staff and come up with ideas and discuss some of our ideas with practitioners and whatnot, and then we take that analysis and dialogue and hopefully some insight, and we create curriculum. Now that curriculum takes the form of movies, newsletters, presentations, social media posts, and we use that term curriculum very intentionally, right? Here's over on one side you've got the raw report, and then we take that and look at it collectively, and out the other end is we're trying to make the lessons more consumable for the practitioners, right? And that transformation into curriculum is key to our process now. And that's something we learned just by going through the process, that just making the reports available is not as effective as doing that extra work and creating curriculum. So how do we get all the components and get them out there? Rapid lesson sharing is relatively new. It's just a self-reporting system where people can send us pictures and stories about what happened to them and what they learned, and that we've seen the popularity of that tool grow since its inception, and it really does offer an opportunity to kind of gauge the climate, right? The culture around reporting, and the willingness of people out there to write down what might be considered a mistake or whatnot and share it with other people. So that's a big part of our data set, or the information that we use to create curriculum. Obviously social media is big in terms of putting the information out there and making it accessible. Our podcast and our blog have become really popular. They do include a lot of effort, but we've seen a lot of use and some pretty tangible feedback on the utility of those things. What's new? Our email subscription service. We've built a list of over 7,000 people that it's nice to be able to push a button and get reports or lessons or curriculum into the inbox of that many people at one time, and it just takes time to build that big of a list. Two More Chains is our quarterly newsletter, and that's known for kind of taking on tough topics, things that aren't really discussed other places. And that we've seen that be pretty well received, and also we get criticism fairly regularly as well, based on some of the ground that we choose to cover. YouTube videos are crucial to the way that training happens here anyway, is that people are assigned topics and then they go on the internet to look for content for the training that they've been assigned to teach, and they often land on our YouTube channel because we have a lot of fire related videos. And TED Ed, if you haven't looked into that, I really suggest you do. It's a way to take those YouTube videos and really direct some of the learning that's going to take place, or the teaching maybe. It's a way to just have some very specific questions and dialogue based on a YouTube video. It's free and it's really easy to use. All right, here's the $1,000,000 question, right? Is it working? Is 58,000 views and 35,000 downloads, is that proof that that folks are learning? And going back to our tagline, we say, it's not really proof that anybody's implementing the lessons. It's a proof of access, right? That it's great to know that people are getting to this stuff, getting to the content, but are they implementing? Which brings me to this short little success story we feel like we have here. I think I got 3 reports of UTVs that caught fire. They didn't all burn to the ground like this, but I had at least 2, maybe 3 reports of UTV floorboard fires. People driving around and they look down and the floorboard of their UTV's on fire. They submitted these rapid lesson sharing documents to us, and what they found was that when they pulled the skid plate off underneath the UTV, a bunch of grass and sticks and stuff had accumulated between the skid plate and the floorboard. It makes sense, right? You're driving around grass, and as it hits, it just kind of gets jammed in there, and over time a lot of it accumulates. And if you happen to drive over hot stuff like surface fire or even just the heat generated by the machine itself, could catch that little ball of tinder on fire. And the practitioners themselves identified the lesson of, hey, we need to pull the skid plate off, and they did that. They went to other UTVs and pulled skid plates off and said, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that could catch fire. And we went through our process and created some curriculum, and it consisted of a blog post, a aptly named podcast, as straightforward as we could get, and a lot of social media pushing on this one simple topic about inspecting your UTV and pulling the skid plate off if that wasn't part of your normal inspection process. So we sent that out, and then a week later we sent out a questionnaire saying, hey, based on what we just sent out, did anybody actually pull the skid plate off their UTV? And we got 200 folks writing back, and a large percentage of them said, yes, we did. We pulled the skid plate off and we found a bunch of grass, and we've actually altered our inspection process to include pulling the skid plate off. There's our change in behavior. This is the kind of stuff that we get really excited about. And it's pretty simple. But that, obviously that follow-up is needed to look at that stuff. But this is as close as we can get to saying, hey, we're doing it. Which brings me to the likelihood of learning. This is something that's kind of central to our current efforts. And it's just a real simple notion that the people that were there for the event, right? The people whose UTV caught fire while they were driving it, or the people that were in the rig when it went off the road, or were, actually in the fire shelters when the fire went over them, they are going to learn something. The likelihood of them learning something is almost entirely, almost 100%. I almost guarantee you they're going to learn something, and it's usually something mechanical, operational, and they're going to learn how they are treated in the aftermath of an incident or an accident, right? Do they feel blamed? Do they feel supported? Do they feel empowered to share their story, right? They are going to learn something. As you move out from that, the likelihood slowly starts to diminish, right? The coworkers, they're going to see the burned up UTV, they're going to hear stories firsthand, they're going to be, emotionally impacted by the aftermath, right? So they're still going to learn something, but the intensity of that diminishes as you move out, right? And it's just, like I said, it's a very simple model. Maybe somebody that has a similar UTV but doesn't know them might hear about it and say, hey, maybe we should do that because we have a UTV. Maybe, but their impetus to take that action is not as intense because their connection is maybe a little more tenuous. The emotional connection anyway. And by the time you get out here to firefighter X that has zero connection to those people or that event, it's much more likely that they're going to say, oh, those idiots burned up their UTV, and have no real reason in their minds to implement that lesson. And that's just a real simple view on the likelihood of learning. And so how do we get to firefighter X? Do we try to move them in towards the middle, or do we, try and capitalize when they just happen to be in one of those other rings? And you can use this for all kinds of different discussions, but it's this perception of the likelihood of learning is driving our one of our current focus areas, which is this local learning model, which is the simplest model you could. I know I use simple a lot, but that's kind of a cornerstone of our our practices. So this local learning model is just, you take these 2 or 3, or depending on the size of your workforce, a small committee made up of worker level folks, and they are responsible for collecting relevant lessons, right? Maybe lessons that come from their own discussions, their own operations, or outside reports. Maybe they subscribe to our email list or they're on our Facebook page. And when they see a relevant lesson, it's part of their job as part of this committee to put it aside and say, hey, that one's relevant to us. Let's put it in the bin for when we get to the next step, which is usually, maybe after fire season. You compile those and say, look, here's the ones we're going to take action on. These are the things that are most relevant to us, things we've experienced, things that we saw in other reports that are especially relevant. And they do the change, right? They're the ones that alter the standard operating procedures or equipment, or a new process. They could say, hey, because all these chainsaws are spraying fuel into people's faces and we operate those same type of chainsaws, we are going to, on this crew, we're now going to put a rag on top of the fuel cap every time we open the fuel cap. That's just our new standard operating procedure, and we are going to teach it to our workforce, especially everybody. The new employees might actually have a better shot at implementing it because that's the way they're going to learn it. But anyway, they're going to drill, they're going to be responsible. This small committee is responsible for implementing that new process. And it's they might only have 2 lessons from the past season, but they are assigned the role of going through this process. And it's just a continual process, right? They start doing it again. They collect lessons and have 3 meetings a year or whatever that looks like locally, and really investing in this notion that we need to empower the influencers, right? And the influencers are at the local level. That's not something we're not going to be able to influence all of those individuals. We just need to empower the person locally that's going to take that on. And getting this notion out there and being transparent about what it is that we're trying to do is going to help us move down this road, rather than a mass education system, right? We just need to provide the content and embrace and accept this model and try and get folks to implement the local learning model formally at the local level. And that's those are some of our lessons about building a lessons learned center.